everyone. Can you all hear me? Yeah, amazing. Good morning. Please join us in for the next panel discussion called Gen Z Empowering Today, Transforming Tomorrow. I know that the coffee is horribly attractive, but we have four amazing speakers joining us here on stage today. My name is Jorik Beyer. I'll be moderating this panel session together with Tim next to me. And let me just quickly introduce our four panelists to you. On the far left, we have Sam, who just arrived. Great to have you here with us today. We'll do a proper intro during the conversation. Maggie, welcome. Good to have you here indeed. We have Carmen here and Anthony, who will be joining us on hopefully a very vivid discussion among us, but also with you here in the room and everyone online through the Q&A and polls. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Jorik. Welcome, everybody. I invite everyone to sit down when you're ready. This is a conversation all about the next generation of customers, next generation of users, next generation of citizens in our cities. How are we going to live, work and play in our cities? What does it mean for our buildings, for our places? There are many myths, there are many debates, many considerations about what the next generation wants. We're going to hear from a wide spectrum of the ecosystem, I think, in the next 40 minutes or so. This is really very much a question about understanding not only what are these generations' values, but also what are their preferences, what are their expectations, what are their demands, and in what way does that mean that we need to change not only how we do things physically, but also what do we do culturally, what do we do in terms of business models, how we work together with others to make that happen. So we're going to go quite quickly around to talk about some of those myths and misperceptions that might surround what we really mean by Gen Z. And then we're going to think about what are the gaps in the way that we are all preparing, which cities or which places or which buildings might be the winners or the losers as they battle to respond to these sorts of trends. And then we might talk about what this really means for everyone who's here today. So I think really what we're hoping to achieve is a vibrant conversation. There are polls already online. I invite you to go into the app. There are 2 or 3 good questions, we hope, in there that we really welcome to your participation on, and we'll check in with that halfway through. And then we're also going to go into a Q&A around midday. So look forward to seeing your questions submitted again via the app, so Kristen will update us in due course. So without further ado, I think we really what we want to do now is get into a question about what some of those big myths, those big ideas that may be slightly misplaced about what we understand when we think about Gen Z. I'm going to turn firstly to Maggie before Zamzam's reply on this question, and then we'll turn over to Carmen and Tony on what the gaps are. So Maggie, from your point of view, the myths, you spend a lot of time consulting and engaging with Gen Z. What is your perspective on all of this?
So yeah, I run a media company, and we have been looking into how to establish brands that are specifically, directed at that population and that really speak to that demographic, not in such a kind of vague way, but really specifically. And so part of making those brands a reality is, of course, doing focus groups and getting feedback and finding out how people are responding. And all of the team that was doing that are all millennials, right? We're all doing these focus groups, and we're inviting a bunch of Gen Zers to the table to talk about all these questions. And everyone on the team, so all these millennials and a couple of Gen Xers, had a certain image in their mind of what is a Gen Z person going to have, what kind of aesthetic are they going to like, or what kind of statements, what kind of messaging is going to resonate the most with them. And we were so wrong. We were so off. It was ridiculous. There was this idea of, this irreverence and all this other stuff. No, reverence was it was much more reverent and we have to have more respect for the information that we're providing here, and we have to have more respect for the integrity behind the journalistic aspect of this project. And wow, and my whole team was sitting there like, Jesus, these people are serious. These are serious 18 to 20-year-olds. Amazing. So we were very surprised, and there are a lot of things that we learned in that focus group, but the main one is that we don't understand what we think we understand. And I think that that's a really, really important insight, to keep your mind open and your ears open and really pay attention to how this very engaged population is changing and experiencing things.
Is this on? Yeah. So I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think in the sense that often, almost always, just come off from Glasgow from the COP conference, where I was a part of the youth delegation. Quite literally, the message that the youth as a whole are sending is literally consult us and talk to us about the decisions that you make that will affect us. And I think often, almost always, decisions are made on our behalf, right? Decisions are consulted and are thought, and it's for the best. But the reality is we have a more conscious and more politically aware and essentially informed consumers and young people than we've ever had before, and there's several reasons for that, right? One of the reasons is how easily accessible information is to us, right? How we're able to access anything and everything and find key things that you wouldn't have able access to just a couple of years ago, right? And that key to information allows us to be not only politically aware, but also actually more conscious about how ethical the goods are that are being provided, and how and the journey things have been through, right? Like, we're more interested in ensuring that we protect our local communities and things are like locally sourced than it coming from very far away. And I think when you have these politically conscious and aware young people, then they're expecting that from the services, the goods, and everything around them that are surrounding. And I think often the assumption that is made is that we want things that are aesthetic and cool and colourful and pleasing. And actually, the reality is it couldn't be far from that. I mean, we do like the aesthetics and cool stuff too.
That's really helpful, and I think there's two things in what you both said. Firstly, actually, we've got to get over this cliche of superficiality, and there is real depth here, and we have to be careful and considerate and mindful about what those really things are. Secondly, we've got to listen better. We've got to be humble. We've got to be curious about what we're discovering. And I guess from this point of view, we've got to start thinking about what this means in terms of how we, as a community, start to adapt. There are many gaps, I think, we can fairly say, are in terms of what kind of product we're supplying, what kinds of experience we are tailoring. And from that point of view, I'd love to turn to Tony first, get a sense of, from your point of view, what's the biggest gap, a set of gaps that we really see here?
Well, I'm from Gen X, and if I go back 15 years, I was working with universities, and we were talking about digital immigrants and digital natives. And at the time, I was working with a lot of universities when it was the advent of social media. And at the time, Facebook wasn't fully open. So students were using Facebook, but the rest of the world wasn't really. And I remember talking to universities and saying, this is going to change the way that your marketing works. You know, these students are suddenly going to take their own pictures, make up their own stories about your brand. And their reaction to that was censorship. They said, no, we don't want them to do that. Can you please make it stop? Turn it off. Turn it off. And I was like, no, you can't turn off social media. That's just going to happen. You've got to get with the program. This is going to happen. And they literally were like, no, we definitely don't want that to happen. We don't want students taking pictures and sharing pictures. That's not what we want at all. And then I think about where we were then and where we are now. And if we look at it now, we've got these Gen Z people are basically exchanging cryptocurrency while we speak. And they're representing themselves in places like Decentraland with an NFT that their friend designed that's now worth over $1 million. And they're forming decentralized organizations that are now buying real-world assets. So I'm not sure it's a gap. I think it's more of a chasm. And if anything, it has grown. It hasn't got closer. And so, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm afraid the news is be very afraid.
Okay, bridging that chasm is a fascinating thing to really dwell on in a second. Carmen, how do you see this?
I always have a bit of a dual role because I always talk a lot to international students that want to go study abroad, and I always talk to universities that want to attract those students. And oftentimes what I notice is that there's a bit of a miscommunication gap in terms of expectations, in that oftentimes I think if you speak to any one university, everybody thinks that they're the best, they're the most amazing, they're the best choice for any student in the world to absolutely study. And I think what's happening is that students are becoming, and Gen Z in general, is a lot more critical. They have a lot more information. If you do set an expectation that you are the best, that you are very welcoming, that you are very open to Gen Z, that you're sustainably driven, whatever it is that your message is, if you don't back it up, they will know. And I think authenticity and really being able to meet those expectations is more important than ever, because it's going to come out to the social media, it's going to come out to the student voices. So I think whatever it is that you decide to be in your messaging, just be that and back it up. That's very important.
Fascinating, yeah. I think one of the things, I mean, in that sense, it's a good moment that we're discussing this here at the class conference. I mean, if we look back sort of 10 years ago when this all started, I think that whole purpose of bringing together these different generations, discussing like how does the future of student accommodation look like? How does the future of living in cities look like? But how do also communities and districts and cities are shaped? I think it's super, I mean, in the 10 years, I mean, it had only become more topical. I think one of the questions for me, and I think that would be maybe sort of a next round, would be how do we, because we have, I mean, in your firm, that difference between Gen Z and the millennials was rather small in a way. I don't want to make any generalization about the audience here in the room, but in real estate, these differences can be even bigger. Mm. And then we have sort of the 5-6 year sort of development cycle of a scheme where a lot of people here in the room now are thinking about what to build and operate in 5 years' time. And I think there's potentially a divide between the spatial environment and the sort of the experience that you layer on top of that. And so maybe part of that is not something that you always have to adjust, but the other bit is that you have to double down on sort of making that bridge. I'll be very keen to understand a little bit better how you see that and what kind of role you see for sort of also the spaces that we get, and also sort of the governance behind how we shape. Do we need other actors in the development chain, or do we need different sort of participation models? I'd be very keen to get some of your thoughts on that.
I think one thing that Carmen said before that was really important is the authenticity part of it. And when we think about the generational or intergenerational dialogue here, how we talk to each other about the future and about how things should evolve, it has a lot to do with understanding the part of it that you were talking about, actually, Samson, with the kind of conveniences that we're used to. What do we expect from our everyday life, but also what do we expect from the cities we live in? What do we expect from the organizations we're part of? What do we expect from our university? These kind of things. I expect to be able to take out my phone and find not only a place to eat, drink, or meet people. I want to be able to Tinder. I want to be able to get a car. I want to be able to do, and all from my little phone right here. And they all grew up this way. Sorry, you all grew up this way. and I think that's something, you know, I still had a landline when I was a kid. And so there's this aspect of talking to each other about not how do we, for instance, make the student visa immigration process easier, and we all in our ivory towers talk about this, but hey, how would you like to experience getting your student visa when you arrive? What would be ideal for you? Oh, yeah, well, I want to know that my ID is stored correctly. I want to know that there's a completely, I don't know what your expectations would be, right? And opening that conversation to the people that it actually affects, I think is a really key part of understanding where the technological advancement has to take us. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it kind of speaks to what you guys both were saying.
Indeed, and I think the immediacy of being included is also incredibly important. So oftentimes what I see happen, and I warn you, please try not to do it, is that we involve the users, the next generation of students, the people who are going to be in our accommodation, kind of in the end stages of like, what would you like your room to be decorated at, instead of the beginning stage of, well, what does living in a city mean to you? What is it that you want to be able to do? Are you looking for something that's incredibly interconnected? Do you want to contribute to the local community? How can we facilitate that within the facility that we're already building, instead of it being an afterthought that you just do at the end because somebody said, I want to have a community place. And we're like, oh, I guess we'll redo this room to do something. But doing it from the early stage, I think, really changes the conversation. And of course, it's a lot more difficult to do because in the end, I think that's also where the generational part comes in. We want to listen. I think we're not always great at doing it, but there's also limitations to what we can build, to how we can do it, to having 6-year plans, and what if something changes in the meanwhile, and you cannot just be continuously adapting all the time. But yeah, a middle ground would be ideal, I think.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, like the biggest issue I find often almost is when it comes to young people and youth spaces as a whole. They're often almost always tokenized, right? It's a tick box exercise, like, yeah, we've consulted the students, yeah, they like the color pink, we're gonna put that on a wall. But the reality is, like, often what we forget is that these young people are skilled, intelligent, and able to give you actually input and advice that actually would be very useful for you. So actually, in the sense of like when you are putting together a project, when you're building involving young people from the very beginning is actually as useful as it is to you as it is to them. And it's understanding actually the people that are going to be using those services, right? And bringing them in, and when I say bring them in and consulting them, I don't mean inviting them for a meeting. I mean actually employing these young people to be a part of your teams and to be able to consult properly and work with you. Because then that's actually showing real commitment to understanding what future generations want and need. And I think almost always, often what happens in these structures, in these spaces, is that there is assumption that this new generation of people are often almost selfish or kind of like think about their own individual needs. But actually the reality is, when you build student communities that are quite literally exclusive, don't allow them to interact with the local community, we see problems, right? There's a big exclusion between those the students that are coming to live in that area and that local community. There's a disconnect, and it's been built in that way. It's been designed in that way because there was never a point where you consulted and understood actually the impact that those young people moving to that area has on the local community, right? And so actually one of the things that I find incredibly important, and one of the things that I worked on when I was student president at my university in Manchester, was making sure that the students, the thousands and thousands of students that came to Salford, also understand the local community at Salford, right? Worked with the local community at Salford. When we held big festivals and events in the Grand Park, we made sure that we cleaned up, and we also helped when the local community organized stuff. And it's ensuring that you understand that actually young people are heavily invested in the local communities and care more about actually making the world a just and sustainable place, right? It's not about us coming to university and having fun. Actually, it's about making sure that when we're there, we have an impactful, meaningful thing to look back at and say, actually, we did that, we were a part of that, and that was my community at one point, and this is what I did. And actually, I think that's always missed off the table, because it's assumption of like, oh, these young kids are going to come, they're going to wreck the place, they're going to have so much fun and so many parties, and then they're going to forget it. And actually, the reality is, we like to have a good time, but the reality is we want to make sure our experiences at universities are meaningful, are important, because the reality is what you learn outside of your lectures and your classes are what you take away, is what stays with you for the rest of your life. And I think that's an important thing that's always missed, and assumptions that are made about young people.
That's a really good point.
You've all been saying something quite profound, I think, about how we've all got to learn to manage uncertainty. We've got to learn to trust the intergenerational boundaries and surf across them much more effectively. Invest in the capacity to engage, I guess, as well across that. And this means changes within as individuals, within our small organizations and teams, but also how do we work as a sequence of buildings within a neighborhood? How do we work as a whole place, and even as a whole city? It was striking to us. We've seen that, European cities are among the best in the world. 13 of the world's top 20 cities in terms of appeal to Gen Z are in Europe. But that, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that we're all doing the best that we can. And I think there's a lot of improvement to make. I'm interested to know, as we think a bit more holistically and broadly about what places need, what cities need, what are the fundamental ingredients of good city building, but also appealing to the next generation. What do you think it is that's going to separate the winners and the losers in that regard? Tony, perhaps.
Well, I think it's coming out in the theme here, isn't it? That you're not going to build it for them, you're going to build it with them. And it's got to be an authentic experience. And I think when you look at it from a digital experience, the change that's going to come is going to be quite profound. The internet at the moment is seen as a thing that you access through your phone, but it's going to be all around us. And with AR and VR and with the metaverse, it's going to be very much a part of every part of that experience. And the idea that someone like me, even a Gen X person, is going to be able to build this for them is kind of a bit silly, really. It's like, I don't get it. I look at my daughter on TikTok and I don't get it. It's like I can try and get it, but I just don't. No. And she looks at me and she goes like, look, you're just a boomer. You're never going to get it. And she's right. I'm like, and so I don't think we can keep pretending anymore. We're not going to build it for them. We're going to build it with them, or we're going to get it wrong.
Yeah. Carmen, what's your point of view?
I think I really resonate with the idea of, the internet becomes everything around you, and everything that is around you becomes interactive, because, as you're saying, from your phone you can do everything, but then why can't you arrange a community meetup in 5 minutes from now because you want to discuss something important? Why can't you book this room immediately now because something important is happening and it's available? Why not, I don't know, if you're building a hotel and you're thinking, oh my God, we have this really important documentary we all want to be watching, and it has to be tonight. Like, everything, I think, needs to become very immediate. If you're going to get in a bus to go from A to B, yeah, you're also going to end up using your phone or maybe your digital devices as well. So I think we really need to try to think in terms of how do people interact with everything around them and how the generation expects to be interacting with everything around them. And I think immediacy is going to be one. Data privacy, because the more data we share, the more data we want to protect. And I think, yeah, the authenticity of, well, is this built to be helping me, or is it just because we are trying to make a profit off something? So I think that's going to kind of come into play together in how we develop cities, buildings, and everything else around them.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, fully agree, and I think that that appeal of cities that you touched upon, I mean, it's great to have a sort of appealing city, but you also need an accessible city. And so you need to have the right housing stock to not only be attractive for the talent, but also to be able for the talent to be there. And not just for 2 years sort of funded or 6 months on an Erasmus scheme, but you want to also not only attract, but also retain the talent. And so I think there's a discussion on sort of what is the base layer of a good city? What kind of infrastructure do we build? And I think in this discussion, what I feel is, I mean, there's a part of it is sort of that authentic experience, is that whole tech sort of layer. But the other thing is just building proper infrastructure. And that is about getting the right mix between accessible housing, affordable housing, co-work spaces in the sort of vicinity of universities, that idea of the urban campus, trying to really bring these kind of districts together. With a lot of sort of benefits. I think about what is the future of mobility? How do we make sure that young people move enough in order to thrive? So how do we create sort of walkable micro districts where then that layer on top is sort of that ultimate experience for Gen Z? And I think that is sort of the thing that we sort of could maybe separate a little bit, build sort of these proper districts, and that is a question also for everyone here in the room, and then make the step to not only allow for Gen Z to thrive, but also for every next generation to thrive. Because in the end, I think what the topic of this session is trying to demystify, I think zooming out, I mean, it's not about one generation with a label. It's about an audience. It's about a community that is ever evolving and trying to be flexible and agile to respond to these quickly changing needs. I think that is something that we all need to get better at.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're halfway through this session, and I think we're really moving forward at a good pace. I invite you to submit your answers to the polls before we turn to those in a few minutes' time. But I guess we're really hearing a lot about the relationship between the digital and the real physical space, and how organizations and place makers manage that relationship in a coherent way. And I guess there's this balance as well between the experiential but also the engagement side, that sense that Zamzam's really picking up of that desire for input, for impact. You build bonds and you build relationships to your community when you make those contributions, and you're not seen simply as customers. Zamzam, when you think about your experience and others that you represent, what is it that really makes a difference, do you think, in terms of places that do this well, and what good looks like in terms of how you attach to a place and to a wider city as well, perhaps, versus those that maybe it's a little bit more transactional?
I think from my perspective, and a lot of the young people that I've worked with, and a lot of the organizations we've interacted with, often when we work, it's seeing actually what else outside of the normal thing that they offer. Like they could be a coffee shop, but what do they do on top of that, right? Do they work with the local community? Do they advocate on a particular thing that's important? I think social justice is actually something that's very pivotal and important to a lot of the work that we do. And when an organization actually roots itself in social justice, regardless of what it does, whether it enables and allows international students who are unable to afford or be able to retain somewhere to live, like actually supporting them through that process, whether it allows and welcomes refugees. Like I think actually, like to me, those extra added benefits really, to me, sets an organization apart from everything else. And I think one of the things that was highlighted actually quite a lot is that, yeah, literally, we live in a global village. Like the reality is, like, this isn't Amsterdam isn't so far away from Manchester right now, because in the reality of the sense that, like, I could literally right now tweet something and create a hashtag and start a movement within minutes, and we have access to that, and therefore, because we have access to be able to cause mass movements so quickly and so easily, right? To me, it's important it could also happen in the other way, in the sense that like when somebody's doing something incredible, we could also tweet and put a message out, and people will support that movement because it's doing important things, right? And I think that's what sets organizations apart when you're doing something for a social good. Because the reality is, to me, what the most important thing is, regardless of like how I go through life as a consumer, is that I'm ensuring that I interact with ethical businesses and organizations, that I work with organizations and businesses that are rooted in social justice and social good, and actually just don't pay lip service, like was said, right? In the sense that like, don't say they care about sustainability, because the reality is, I will do an FOI and I'll find out if you care about sustainability. I will find out if you are actually committing to the targets that you're focusing on, right? And the reality is, you can't kind of blindside us in the same way, I guess, people have in the past, because we have access to information so easily. There are movements and organizations that are able to, that literally do this for a living, where they FOI organizations, and they put together the data and give it to students, right? These exist, so you can't hide behind anything. We live in a world where everything is becoming more and more transparent, and the more honest and authentic you are as an organization, the more it shines through and it shows. And I think that's incredibly important.
So the way I interpret what you're saying is, on one level, there's often too much of a focus on creating or being part of the next Shoreditch or the next Södermalm or the next Kreuzberg, and actually you need to be much more invested in what is the character and the real set of interactions and attachments that you form through making social contributions and many other kinds of relationship that I think students have with their community. Maggie, from your point of view, think about, I know you spend a lot of time in Vienna, but in many other cities in Europe, North America, where do you see, or what do you think are the real core ingredients of place making in this context, in terms of how we're going to respond to these needs and these aspirations?
That's a fantastic question. I just want to say one thing real quick, just in response. It's so fascinating to me. You say social justice, and to you that's a good thing. In the millennial generation, when we wanted social justice, we were the social justice warriors. Nobody wants us because we just get outraged about things unnecessarily, and we kind of made a bad name for social justice in my generation. So, do you know what I'm talking about, right?
How things have changed.
Well, right, yeah. So if you look into that a little bit now, and you say, okay, what is social justice become? It's a completely different. It's about transparency, and it's about it's not about outrage anymore. It's about voicing the things that need to be voiced, saying the things out loud. And it used to be about outrage, I think, in people's minds. And the amount of misunderstanding that happens, I think, with cancel culture and these kind of terms that oftentimes Gen X or even millennial generations they say, oh, this is so terrible, you're taking away people's authenticity or people's whatever. And nobody asks the person, what is the actual problem with what was said here? Or what is the actual problem with this person's performance, etc. That's all I wanted to say.
Honestly, I think I just wanted to touch on the concept of the concept of cancel culture is literally like a phenomenon that's obsessed by like millennials and Gen X. Like, honestly, we couldn't care less. Because the reality is, like, I think for me, when it comes to, and I know 100% I agree with you, but I think when it comes to, like, for me, social justice is ensuring that you put people before profit. That's literally simply what it means in the simplest terms, and that really means making sure that the bottom number doesn't matter as much as the lives of people, right? It's very simple, and I think that's something that's often almost always missed. And like, I think as young people, like, we are, of course, I think in the sense of like completely unafraid of the repercussions of organizations, in the sense that like when landlords threaten us, then we expose them, and there's like mass movements and campaigns that support those young people. I think there's now instead of like the outrage that you're supposed to, I think because you are able to build mass movements so easily, right? You're not doing it by yourself, you're doing it with a movement of thousands of people who are literally at your helm and ready to support you in that. And I think that's what's changed.
You don't need the outrage. You're loud already.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
100%.
So to get back to your question.
Yeah.
So cities, what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? I'm super lucky. I live in Vienna. We are best city in the world, like 10 years in a row, yada, yada, yada. We're like quality of life kings. Why are we quality of life kings? We experiment a lot in Vienna. We have a subway. I mean, I'm from New York. We have a subway there too. Not the same kind of subway. So first of all, in Vienna, it doesn't smell like urine. I lived in Paris too. It's amazing. I don't know how they do it, but they also have elevators everywhere. You know, it's inclusive. They don't do things from the top down. They don't say, we need a subway system, let's make it go everywhere where we need commerce to happen. They say, we need a subway system, who will be affected by this? Oh, mothers, let's talk to mothers. Let's talk to people who don't have their driver's license yet. Let's talk to young people. And Vienna has always built things on the basis of experimentation. And that always, I think, is exactly what we're talking about with the dialogue and intergenerational understanding. You can't know stuff about people without asking them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key thing with infrastructure and smart city progress in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think in building on that, I mean, what Vienna does very well, I mean, is that sort of very thoughtful kind of planning. On the other hand, I think it's also a government and a local government that's very well capable of doing that. It's also very well funded through taxes. And I think what we see in our work with Velocity across Europe is that, I mean, not a lot of city governments are able to bring that level of capabilities, or are able to bring that sort of development positions, for example. And then you need a different kind of partnership. And I think that's something that, of course, within this audience, we speak, we have thought leaders here from the industry, we have an enormous community. But how do you sort of create that level of collaboration with a local government that you ultimately need to build these kind of districts?
But you're right, that's a really good point, and I think that a lot of people underestimate the ability that a city actually has to use that taxpayer money. I mean, I'm happy to pay taxes, I buy civilization, and I'm also told every single day by the city of Vienna what it did for me, you know? And I'm very aware of my benefits in that city. And I'm being made aware of it every day. If you don't communicate that to your people, they won't feel taken care of, and they won't feel like they deserve. The Viennese are the most spoiled people in the world. Anyone who's chose to be in Vienna, they know how good they have it, right? They're sitting there like, this is amazing, you guys. And the Viennese people who were born there and grew up there, they have no idea what it's like other places. You know, they don't know how spoiled they are. So I think it's important, traveling is important, understanding other cultures is important, but also communicating to your community how great they have it.
And, well, I think the interesting part is that, of course, not everybody can be Vienna, not everybody can be Amsterdam, and that's kind of the point of it. You don't have to be as a city if you figure out what is important for the local community, what is important for the government, and what is important for, well, in my case, the university there. If, let's say, Eindhoven wants to be very techy, so that's why the government collects a lot of data where everything is monitored, there's a lot of data points, there's cameras everywhere, you're going to see it. But at the same time, it's because they want to be very techy, digital, so that is also the focus of the university, but that is also the focus of the spaces you're going to build where everything is designed with that in mind, and therefore it becomes a theme, and that brings the authenticity in, and you're also going to attract the people that resonate with that. So I think, yeah, you need to find a bit your own niche. Maybe your niche is just going to be art, and that is fine, and you're just going to have an aesthetically beautiful place, and you'll attract people that really care about being in an aesthetically beautiful place. But there's something for everybody.
100%. No, and I think in that sense, Vienna is almost an odd example. I mean, it's a lovely city.
But look at Berlin. They're ugly as hell, and that's their aesthetic. You know, like
but that's
proud of it. And that's a good. Yeah, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I mean that.
But we have a lot of ugly cities in Europe.
Not what I meant at all.
No, but I think my point is more on. I mean, that city is. I mean, of course, it's very well sort of publicly governed. I think we're a lot of sort of more neoliberal cities across Europe, where that level of sort of interaction between a local stakeholder and a government is completely different. And there I think there's an opportunity and a task for us as an industry to educate and to inspire also administrators, civil servants, because we need, I mean, what I see in my work is that the heartbeat of a real estate developer, the heartbeat of a brand that wants to attract talent is very different still from the heartbeat of a local municipality, of a city government. And I mean, and that's even in the big cities the case. So I think that divide became bigger and bigger over the years, maybe except for Vienna. And that's something that we as an industry need to take care of.
So in a way, public funding and public power might be finite, but there's a leadership role to be played by many organizations, and we've all got to work harder in all of our cities, I think. Kristen, I want to turn to you. The polls are in your hands. Do you have any highlights for us?
Yeah, definitely. So in the polls, it's geared towards basically Gen Z generations. I'm from Canada, so I say Z. So the first question actually goes to the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about what the biggest challenge is for creating and delivering a product and service for Gen Z. And the number one answer that came up is managing expectations, which really what it all comes down to. So that's highlighted there. Another poll question is, how much do you see Gen Z impacting the future of university and city life? And we have a split answer here, one being unprecedented transformation, which I think we can also think about ourselves. And the second answer here is fail to prepare, then prepare to fail. So it's in our hands to basically take action there. And I will also highlight the last poll question. Which of these is the most underestimated characteristic of Gen Z? The number one answer is commitment to personal identity, mental health, and diversity. So also these themes that we're picking up here today.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful. And I think in a way there's something that the audience is clearly picking up on, that we need to all work harder actually by observing that there's either we're going to fail if we don't act, or in fact there's a transformation that we may not even be able to be ready for. To Tony's point, there's a serious question of how we adapt and reform. Tony, pick up on that for us. What do you think, expand on what you were saying earlier about how it is from the point of view of a developer or an investor, or those who are thinking about what they do next, given that chasm that you spoke about? What would you urge? Should they build a ladder, or what is the right kind of approach and organizational effect they should?
My expertise is very much towards the digital experience. And I think if we look at it, young people are growing up with Spotify and Netflix and just instantaneous hyper-connected youth. The universities that were worried that they were going to take pictures don't need to worry about that anymore, because now hyper-connected TikTok youth can create channels and disseminate it at speed. And at the same time, we're struggling to get together with I literally see it now, where it's like we're really proud that we've managed to basically personalize their email just around the time that they stop using email. And so there is this chasm that we need to bridge, and I think the only way to do it is to literally co-opt young people into making an authentic experience, and basically don't try to bridge that digital gap in ways that you can't. You don't have the budgets of Amazon and Netflix, and even if you did, you're not going to get your heads around the AI that's behind it. We are literally less than 12 months away from where we're using AI at the moment in our marketing, and the students will be using their AI to filter your marketing very shortly.
Mm-hmm. Quite a strong wake-up call, Tony. Thank you. And I guess to Carmen, in terms of your point of view from a university, if you're a university or a planner or an investor or a developer, what's the one act that you think would really begin to start addressing the chasm that Tony outlines?
I fully agree with the hiring in that we were doing a webinar recently, and we were asking the universities that got the award for the best overall student satisfaction and experience on campus, what are you doing differently than everybody else? And we're saying, well, we're literally inviting students, they're coming over continuously. We give them assignments to go over the campus. We ask them to write down what they're experiencing on a daily basis and text it back to us and write back to us as to, this was very annoying today. The woman at the cafeteria, you guys say you're a very inclusive university, but she was being very rude and discriminant towards me. So I don't see how that resonates with the brand you're trying to put out. And really inviting people and saying, okay, then, we're going to have a dinner every other week, and we're going to sit down and talk about it and figure out together what to do. And also ask students not just for feedback, but also for solutions, because they can also see, how could we fix it? And therefore, they're going to feel more included. And I think what I also notice is, that's one thing that I always ask of universities. Please, in your branding, do the same. So I think I've seen so many visuals of people wanting to say we're a very diverse university, and it's always the same kind of 4 students sitting in the background, one European, one African American. It's just, you can do more, and you can just ask the people who are physically there to contribute and say, hey, what do you want to say about the brand? How should we communicate it? Instead of going for these stereotypical ways of trying to show sustainability or social justice or diversity or whatever it is that we want to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I've asked universities several times, what's your unique selling point to an international student? They say, we're very welcoming to international students. I say, well, yeah, that's very unique, because I've met lots of universities who said they're not welcoming to international students in their marketing. So yeah, this is how to be very much the same as every other student city and university in the world.
So substance over style, proper differentiation.
Or be authentic. I mean, I think be authentic. I think most places do have, you know, as you've mentioned about the different cities, they have different characteristics, and you can be authentic about those. You know, I've literally seen Newcastle University market itself because it has a beach. If you've been to the beach there, it's not somewhere you'd want to go. So, you know, it's probably not the unique selling point you wanted to go for. You know, it's basically talk about what it is unique about your particular area or your particular university, and don't try and shy away from it. You know, we can't all be Hawaii.
I would just add, I think so. As the European Commission is working now on European universities, right? And we're quite literally trying to build these like interconnected European campuses. We're a part from the European Institute. We're a part of like the establishment of the European Student Card. So it's understanding that actually collaboration is probably more pivotal, important now than ever before. Quite literally the campus experience is going to move beyond just what as we knew it, and I think the only way in which, and like Tony said, essentially that is that you either bring people, the young people that you want to engage with on board, or you kind of lose out. And I think that's when collaboration is key, like understanding and working together rather than competing against each other, actually, because the reality is that when you do that, you're all going to sort of fall at a loss, right? It's understanding that like when technology is developed to figure out what these young people need, or like markets or something, somebody else develops a VPN for free and accessible that young people can like completely filter. Like I have a filter that was developed by a young person that I don't get marketing or anything like, and it's like, it's that, right? Like the reality is like the young people, somebody will create it like within minutes and make it free and accessible. So like, when you're consistently competing against each other, you're at a loss, because when something's made free and accessible immediately overnight, because a young person had the time to design it and had the understanding to be able to do that within a couple of hours, whereas an organization has been doing it and developing it and putting the content together and the marketing together for like literally years, you're at a loss, right? And I think that's so the most important thing is collaborating and actively collaborating with other organizations, with young people, with youth organizations, like engaging with your local student unions on campuses, right? Like what do they want? What's important for them? Because they are actually the sole representative for young people on that campus, right? And when you engage with them in a meaningful way, like I had. When I was president on my union, I'd get emails and be like, Zamzam, we're working on this particular thing. We'd like to meet up with you. And I'll be honest, like that. There's a clear for me. There's a clear thing of like, actually, you just want a bit of my time to tick box exercise and say you've spoken to the SU president, and 9 times out of 10 I'll tell you no thanks. I'm busy. And the reality is, yes, we have a really busy schedule. Like student union presidents are incredibly busy. But when you actually engage in a meaningful way and say, this is the project that we're working on. We're at the very beginning of it. We like to engage with students. We like your support on this because it's going to affect your very students X, Y, Z. Then that's a meaningful engagement, and we can sit down and be a part of that planning and actually actively take on what needs to be done and what could be changed and what could be influenced. That's more meaningful, and that's more important.
Zamzam, thank you very much. I mean, I think your message is really that Generation Z is canny, much cannier than we give it credit for. There's something about consciousness, but not just political, it's societal, and also how you're being treated, much more conscious. And then thirdly, something about willingness to build, not just to criticize, and that's something that was also extending the arm of opportunity to those in the room, I think. Last word to Maggie. No pressure, but I guess we'd love to hear what's your one sense of what needs to be done, what's the takeaway that you take from this conversation?
I just listening to what you were talking about, I run a media company. Some of our brands, we have paywalls. Took us 6 months to develop this frickin' paywall, right? And not because we're idiots, but because paywalls are complicated and people are complicated. Nobody wants to pay for anything. And so we were kind of, figuring out ways we can make it tiered, and this one without money and this one with money and anything. And then my buddy, who's in like the office next door at the co-working space where we have our offices, buddy of mine who's a developer, releases on his Instagram account, he's like, hey guys, check out this thing that I made. thing that he made is basically the inspect button where you can just read the whole text behind any paywall. It's like, you know, and he can build that in a day and a half. And I'm just like, we spent 6 months, man. So what I'm trying to say is not everything you build is futile. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that there's no right answer that is worth investing a lot of attention in without having that dialogue, without speaking to the generation that it's going to affect and who's going to be your customer.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. I think for all of us in the room, I think the takeaway of that is, I mean, we need to bridge that enormous divide that we have, but we also need to accommodate for a lot of growth in our cities and our communities. And I think what I like is sort of circling back to the poll, that idea of prepare to fail or fail to prepare. I think if let's get buildings right. On that 80-20 sort of divide, let's really work on making buildings better, and let's make more buildings so we have more access in the cities. And then leave that 20% as sort of an agile space to work together with students through the process. I mean, I really love that idea of completely incorporating them in that whole sort of flow of development. But let's also not wait for it. Let's keep on making pace. I think if we sort of start navel glazing on Gen Z, I think we're not doing the right thing. We need to speed up the development of inclusive, just cities collectively. And let's make that an effort of the community here of the class. Thank you so much for joining our session, and have a wonderful conference today.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panelists. Thank you.
You're going now.